The Grand War Chamber of the Veloxy hegemony was a place designed to make visitors feel small. It floated in orbit around the gas giant Theros 9, a massive crystalline station that caught the light of three distant suns and scattered it across walls that stretched higher than most buildings on most worlds. The ceiling disappeared into shadow above. The floor was polished to a mirror shine. Every surface, every angle, every carefully placed light was built to remind anyone who entered that they stood in the heart of the most powerful civilization in the known galaxy. And today, it was full. Representatives from over 60 conquered species filled the observation galleries. Military commanders from a dozen Veloxy battle fleets occupied the central ring of seats, their iridescent scales catching the light as they shifted and murmured among themselves. Advisors, strategists, weapons engineers, and political officers crowded the upper tiers. The air hummed with the low buzz of 100 different languages being whispered through translation devices. At the center of it all, raised above everyone else on a platform of black crystal, sat Supreme Arbiter Calix Vone. He was impressive even by Veloxy standards. Nearly 3 meters tall when he stood, with 4 arms folded across a chest covered in scales that shifted between deep blue and bright silver depending on how the light hit them. His eyes were large, golden, and carried the look of someone who had never once in his life been told no. He had conquered 11 species. He had overseen the expansion of the hegemony across 2 full galactic arms. He considered warfare not as a challenge, but as a simple math problem, and he had never gotten the answer wrong. Today was supposed to be routine, a strategic summit, a review of border territories, resource allocation, fleet deployments, the kind of meeting that happened every cycle and produced the same predictable results. Then Scout Commander Yvril asked to speak. She was young. That was the first thing everyone noticed. Young and small for a Veloxy, barely 2 meters, with scales that had not yet darkened to the deep colors of maturity. She stood at the speaker's platform below Calix Vone's seat and looked up at the assembled power of the hegemony, and her hands were shaking. She had just returned from a deep-range reconnaissance mission. 6 months in the Orion Arm, operating alone in a stealth vessel, cataloging species in a region the hegemony had never bothered to explore properly. Most of what she found was unremarkable. Pre-spaceflight civilizations. Minor spacefaring species with no military capability. The usual collection of worlds that would eventually be absorbed into the hegemony when it was convenient. But there was one species that was different. She called them Terrans. They are bipedal, warm-blooded mammals, Yvril began, her voice carrying through the chamber's amplification system. She could hear how thin it sounded in this enormous space. Carbon-based, oxygen breathers, average height approximately 1.7 meters. They originate from a single temperate world in the Sol system, third planet from their star. She paused and looked at her datapad. The number still made her stomach turn. Their homeworld has a population of approximately 8 billion individuals. The chamber went quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then someone laughed. It started in the upper galleries. A short, sharp bark of disbelief from a Veloxy fleet commander. Then another laugh from across the room. Then more. Within moments, the sound rolled through the war chamber like a wave, bouncing off the crystal walls and multiplying. 8 billion on one world. The entire Veloxy hegemony, spread across hundreds of systems and dozens of species, had a total population of 12 billion. And this young scout was telling them that a single planet of soft-skinned primates held 8 billion. Calix Vone did not laugh. He smiled, which was worse. "Scout Commander," he said, and his voice cut through the laughter easily. The chamber quieted. "And you are certain of this number?" "Yes, Supreme Arbiter. I conducted multiple independent counts using different methodologies. The number may actually be conservative. Their census data, which they broadcast openly, suggests the true figure could be higher." "They broadcast their census data?" one of the commanders asked from the central ring. "They broadcast everything," Yvril said. "Their communications are almost entirely unencrypted. News, entertainment, personal messages, military communications. They seem to have no concept of information security on a civilizational level. I was able to monitor their entire electromagnetic output from the edge of their system without any stealth protocols." More laughter. a species that could not even keep its secrets. This was what the scout was worried about. Yvril pressed on. She could feel the room slipping away from her, but she had a duty to deliver her report. Despite their open communications, their military capability should not be underestimated. The Terrans have been a spacefaring species for only a short time relative to most hegemony members, but their rate of technological advancement is unusual. They went from their first powered flight to nuclear weapons in approximately 40 of their years, from nuclear weapons to functional spaceflight in less than 30, from their first colony ships to a network of established worlds in under 2 centuries. She pulled up a chart. The curve of Terran technological progress was almost vertical compared to the gentle slopes of other species. More importantly, she continued, the Terrans do not specialize their population the way most species do. In the hegemony, military service is performed by a dedicated warrior class, typically comprising between 2 and 5% of a species' total population. Among Terrans, military service is open to their entire adult population. Many of their civilians maintain combat training. Their culture places high value on physical fitness, competitive aggression, and what they call resilience. She took a breath. They have been fighting wars among themselves for their entire recorded history. Thousands of years of continuous armed conflict, often involving millions of combatants simultaneously. They have developed weapons capable of destroying their own planet and chose not to use them, not because they lack the will, but because they developed strategic doctrines to manage the threat. They practice war the way other species practice agriculture. It is their single greatest area of expertise. The laughter had stopped now, but not because the room was taking her seriously. It had stopped because the room was growing bored. Yvril could see it in the way commanders shifted in their seats, in the way aides glanced at their own data pads, in the way Calix Vaughn's smile had become fixed and patient, in the way of someone waiting for a child to finish speaking. She tried one more time. Supreme Arbiter, I am formally recommending that the Terran species be classified as an existential consideration. I recommend that all hegemony operations maintain a minimum buffer of 50 light years from known Terran territory. I recommend that no contact, hostile or otherwise, be initiated until a full strategic assessment can be completed by a dedicated analysis team. She lowered her data pad. I believe that a military confrontation with this species would be catastrophic for the hegemony. The silence that followed was the worst kind. Not the silence of consideration, the silence of pity. The kind of silence that fills a room when everyone present is embarrassed on someone's behalf. Calix Vaughn leaned forward in his seat. Scout Commander Yvril, he said, and his tone was gentle in the way that a blade is gentle before it cuts. I appreciate your thoroughness, truly. Deep-range reconnaissance is difficult and lonely work, and the hegemony values the dedication of its scouts. He paused. However, you are young, and you have, I think, made the mistake that many young officers make when they encounter their first unknown species. You have confused quantity with quality. He stood, all 4 arms unfolded, and he gestured broadly at the assembled chamber. The hegemony has faced large populations before. The Grellic had 6 billion on their homeworld when we arrived. They had nuclear capability. They had a warrior culture. They lasted 6 rotations. The Vren had 4 billion in orbital defense platforms. They lasted 8. Numbers, Scout Commander, are meaningless without the technology, the strategy, and the will to use them effectively. He looked down at her. 8 billion soft-bodied primates on a single temperate world, broadcasting their secrets to anyone who listens, fighting among themselves like animals in a pit. This is not a threat. This is a species that has not yet learned to be quiet in a dangerous universe. The laughter came back, louder this time, more confident. Commanders slapped their hands on the arms of their seats. Someone in the gallery made a crude joke about Death World primates that got a roar of approval. Yvril stood at the speaker's platform and felt something cold settle in her chest. Not embarrassment. Something deeper than that. Something that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and watching someone walk toward it with their eyes closed. Supreme Arbiter, she said quietly, with respect. The Grellic did not have faster-than-light travel. The Vren did not have artificial intelligence. The Terrans have both, and they have had them long enough to build things with them that I could not fully catalog in 6 months of observation. I saw shipyards in their system that were producing vessels at a rate that exceeded our most productive facilities by a factor of. That will be sufficient, Scout Commander. Calix Vone's voice had lost its gentleness. You have delivered your report. It has been heard and noted. You are dismissed. The word dismissed landed like a door slamming shut. Yvrel stiffened. She looked around the chamber one last time, searching for a single face that showed doubt, concern, anything other than amusement or indifference. She found one. In the far corner of the central ring, partially hidden behind a column of dark crystal, sat Drenok. He was a Torvan, one of the few non-Veloxi permitted at the war table, kept around because his species had a talent for pattern recognition that even the Veloxi grudgingly respected. He was old by any species standards. His gray-green skin was scarred from campaigns that predated most of the officers in the room. His three eyes watched Yvrel with an expression she could not quite read. He was not laughing. Yvrel gathered her datapad and left the speaker's platform. The chamber buzzed behind her as the summit moved on to resource allocation reports and border patrol schedules. Her report was already forgotten, a footnote, a joke that would be retold in officers' clubs for cycles to come. The young scout who came back from the Orion Arms scared of monkeys. She was halfway down the corridor outside the chamber when she heard footsteps behind her. Heavy, uneven footsteps. Torvan footsteps. She stopped but did not turn around. Scout Commander? Drenok's voice was like gravel being poured into a metal container. He moved to stand beside her. He was shorter than her but twice as wide, built like something designed to survive impacts. You did well in there, he said. I was laughed at and reprimanded. Yes, those two things are not mutually exclusive with doing well. You delivered an accurate report to people who did not want to hear it. That is the definition of doing your job. Yvrel finally looked at him. His three eyes studied her with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. You believe me? She asked. I believe your data. Data does not care whether anyone laughs at it. He paused. I have a question. Your report was thorough, but there was one thing you did not describe in detail. What? Their ships. You talked about production rates and fleet numbers? You did not talk about the ships themselves. Yeah, what did they look like? Yvrel was quiet for a long moment. She had not included detailed ship descriptions in her report because she had not known how to describe what she had seen in terms that would make sense to the war chamber. The hegemony built beautiful warships, elegant curves, flowing lines, gleaming hulls that reflected the light of whatever star they orbited. Hegemony vessels were designed to inspire awe, to make enemies understand, at first sight, that they faced a superior civilization. Terran ships were not like that. Wrong, she said finally. Their ships looked wrong, like they were built by something that expected to die and did not care. Drenok said nothing for a long time. His scarred face was unreadable. I was at the Vren campaign, he said eventually. I was at Grelic. I have fought 7 species for the hegemony, and I have won every time. And I have never once heard a scout describe an enemy's ships the way you just described theirs. He put one heavy hand on her shoulder. Keep your data, Scout Commander. Keep your reports. Keep everything. I have a feeling someone will want to see them again, and when they do, they will not be laughing. He turned and walked back toward the war chamber, his uneven steps echoing down the crystalline corridor. Yvrel stood alone in the hallway for a long time. 3 days later, the orders came down from the Supreme Arbiter's office. A standard subjugation fleet of 200 warships was being assembled and dispatched to the Terran border system designated Artemis IV, a minor colony world. Minimal strategic value. The operation was classified as a corrective incursion, intended to test Terran military response times and claim resources for the hegemony. 200 warships. For a species the Supreme Arbiter considered barely worth noticing. He had told his staff it was overkill, that 50 ships would probably be sufficient, but there was no reason not to be thorough. Yvrel read the orders on her datapad in her quarters aboard the scout station. She read them twice. Then she set the pad down on her desk and stared at the wall. She thought about the Terran shipyards she had seen from the edge of their system, the massive orbital structures that never stopped moving, never stopped building, producing ship after ship after ship with a relentless mechanical rhythm that had reminded her of a heartbeat. She thought about the electromagnetic chatter she had intercepted. Not the military transmissions, which were surprisingly sparse and tightly coded when they wanted them to be, but the civilian ones. Music, stories, arguments, laughter, a species that filled every frequency with the noise of being alive. She thought about the number that had made the war chamber laugh, 8 billion, and she thought about what Dranak had not said, but she had understood anyway. That the problem was not the number. The problem was what you got when you took 8 billion members of a species that had spent its entire existence learning how to fight and gave them a reason to stop fighting each other and start fighting something else. Somewhere in the Orion Arm, on a dusty half-finished world called Artemis IV, what 2 million humans went about their daily lives. They farmed. They built. They raised children. They watched their sky and wondered what was out there. They were about to find out, and so was the hegemony. Artemis IV was not a beautiful world. Not yet. It was the kind of planet that needed another 100 years of work before anyone would put it on a postcard. The air was thin and dry. The soil was rust-colored and stubborn. The oceans were shallow and tasted of iron. 2 million humans lived there, spread across a handful of settlements connected by dirt roads and rail lines that cut through flat, empty plains stretching to every horizon. The largest settlement was called New Thessaly. It had a population of about 400,000, which made it the closest thing to a city on a world that was still more construction site than civilization. It had a spaceport, a university, a hospital, 3 bars, and a municipal building where the colonial governor held meetings that nobody wanted to attend. The buildings were low and square and built from local stone because importing materials from Seoul was expensive and the colonists were practical people. It was early morning in New Thessaly when the sky changed. Captain Riva Santos saw it first because seeing things first was her job. She was the commanding officer of the TDF patrol corvette Whiskey Tango, a ship roughly the size of a large commercial transport, currently holding station in a lazy orbit above the Artemis system's outer asteroid belt. And the Whiskey Tango was the only Terran Defense Force vessel assigned to the Artemis sector. It was a border posting. Quiet. Boring. The kind of assignment you got when you were either very new or had annoyed someone important enough to send you somewhere that nothing ever happened. Santos had been here for 11 months. She had annoyed someone important. She was sitting in her command chair with her feet up on the edge of the console, drinking her 4th coffee of the morning and reading a novel on her personal tablet when her sensor officer said something that made her put the coffee down. "Captain, I have contacts, multiple contacts, FTL signatures at the system boundary." Santos swung her feet off the console. "How many?" The sensor officer stared at his screen. He was young, fresh out of the academy. He had never seen a real contact in his entire career. "Ma'am, I am reading 200 FTL signatures." Santos did not panic. She did not shout orders or slam her fist on anything. She set her coffee mug in its holder, placed her tablet face down on the arm of her chair, and sat up straight. "Sound general quarters," she said. "Get me a visual as soon as they drop out." The Whiskey Tango came alive around her. Red lights replaced white ones. Crew members who had been eating breakfast or sleeping or playing cards appeared at their stations within 90 seconds. The ship's systems powered up from standby to full readiness. None of this was frantic. It was practiced. They had drilled for this exact scenario once a week for 11 months. Santos had insisted on it, and her crew had complained about it, and now none of them were complaining. The 200 FTL signatures resolved into 200 warships. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Artemis system in a formation that was clearly designed to be impressive. They arrived in a perfect geometric pattern, a massive diamond shape, layer upon layer of vessels arranged with mathematical precision, each one holding its position relative to the others, with the kind of accuracy that only came from centuries of practice. The ships themselves were beautiful. Santos could admit that, even as her stomach dropped. Voloxy warships were works of art, sweeping curves, polished hulls that reflected starlight like mirrors, energy signatures that pulsed with a rhythm that was almost musical. They looked like they had been designed by sculptors rather than engineers. And there were 200 of them. The smallest was 10 times the mass of the Whiskey Tango. The largest, the flagship at the center of the formation, was a true capital ship, bristling with weapons arrays and sensor dishes and launch bays capable of deploying thousands of fighter craft. Santos looked at her tactical display. 1 green dot, 200 red dots. Well, she said to no one in particular, that is a lot of ships. Her communications officer turned in his chair. Captain, we are receiving a transmission from the flagship. Standard galactic frequency. They are broadcasting in the clear. Put it through. The voice that filled the Whiskey Tango's bridge was translated by the ship's systems into flat, accented English. It was confident in the way that only someone who had never lost could be confident. Attention, yes, inhabitants of the system. I am Fleet Master Orin of the Valoxy Hegemony Subjugation Fleet. By the authority of Supreme Arbiter Calix Vone and the mandate of the Hegemony Council, this system and all resources within it are hereby claimed as territory of the Valoxy Hegemony. All inhabitants will disarm immediately and submit to hegemony governance. Resistance will be met with overwhelming force. You have 1 standard cycle to comply. This message will not be repeated. The transmission ended. Santos sat in her chair and looked at the tactical display for a long, quiet moment. Her bridge crew watched her. Nobody spoke. Open a channel, she said. Same frequency. Channel open, Captain. Santos straightened her uniform. It was wrinkled. It was always wrinkled. She had never been good at that part. Fleet Master Orin, this is Captain Riva Santos of the Terran Defense Force, Patrol, Corvette Whiskey Tango. I am the ranking Terran military officer in this system. I have received your transmission. She paused. I am formally requesting that you withdraw your fleet from Terran sovereign space. Artemis IV is a registered colony of the Terran Federation, and its citizens are under the protection of the Terran Defense Force. Your presence here constitutes an act of aggression under both Terran law and the established conventions of interstellar sovereignty. She paused again. Please leave. There was a long moment of silence. Then the channel crackled with what Santos suspected was laughter. Captain Santos, Orin's voice was amused. Genuinely amused, the way an adult is amused when a child says something accidentally funny. I appreciate your formality. It is noted. However, I have 200 warships at my disposal, and you appear to have 1 small patrol vessel. I am curious how you intend to enforce your request. Santos leaned back in her chair. She picked up her coffee and took a sip. It was cold. She drank it anyway. I do not intend to enforce it, Fleet Master. That is not my job. My job is to make sure you understand what happens next if you do not comply. Consider this your Yvrel moment. The silence that followed was different from the one before. It was sharp, surprised. On the bridge of the Hegemony flagship, Throne of Certainty, Fleet Master Orin stared at his communications panel. Around him, his bridge officers exchanged glances. How did the human know that name? The answer was simple, though Orin would not learn it for some time. The Terran Defense Force had been monitoring Hegemony communications for years. Not through any brilliant act of espionage. The Hegemony, like the Terran's own early civilizations, was careless with its signals. Terran intelligence had intercepted Yvrel's report. They had read it. They had read the War Chamber's response. They knew what the Hegemony thought of them. They had been paying very close attention. I do not know what you are referring to, Orin said, but the amusement had left his voice. Then let me be direct, Santos said. I am transmitting a data package to your flagship. Unencrypted, no embedded code, you can verify it yourself. It contains information about the Terran Defense Force that I think you will find relevant. The data package arrived on Orin's tactical display moments later. His intelligence officers opened it and began reviewing the contents. What they found made several of them sit down. Force projection capabilities of the Terran Defense Force. Total fleet strength, ship classifications, crew complements, industrial output of the Sol system's orbital shipyards, population mobilization protocols, reserve force numbers. The numbers were large, not large the way a Hegemony fleet was large the way a natural disaster was large in a way that did not seem to belong in the same universe as the single small corvette that was transmitting them. Fleet Master, one of Orin's intelligence officers said carefully, if these numbers are accurate, They are not accurate, Oren said. They are propaganda. Inflated figures designed to intimidate. It is the oldest trick in warfare. But his voice was less certain than it had been. Santos continued speaking. Her tone had not changed. She was not angry. She was not afraid. She sounded like a teacher explaining something to a student who was about to make a mistake. Fleet Master, the Terran Defense Force maintains a standing fleet of over 15,000 warships. That number does not include reserve vessels, system defense platforms, or allied fleet contributions. In the event of a threat to a Terran colony, the Defense Force is authorized to execute what we call a case iron response, full combat mobilization of the nearest expeditionary fleet, with reinforcements following on a continuous basis until the threat is neutralized. She let that settle. You have brought 200 ships to threaten a world of 2 million people. I want you to understand that the response to this action will not be proportional to the size of this colony. It will be proportional to the threat. Any threat to any Terran world is treated as a threat to all Terran worlds. That is not a policy decision. It is doctrine. It is built into the command structure at a level that cannot be overridden by any single officer, including me. You are stalling, Orin said. You are one ship. You are trying to buy time. Yes, Santos said. I am absolutely trying to buy time. I am being completely honest with you about that. The question you should be asking is what I am buying time for. Orin's jaw tightened. He was young for a fleet master. Calix Vone's protege, chosen for this assignment because it was supposed to be simple. A training exercise with real targets. A chance to prove himself before moving on to more important commands. He had not expected to feel uncertain. He looked at his tactical display. 200 warships, 1 corvette. The math was simple. The math was always simple. All ships advance, he ordered. Standard approach formation. Begin landing preparations for ground forces. On the bridge of the Whiskey Tango, Santos watched the red dots begin to move. She nodded slowly. She had expected this. She had hoped for a different outcome. The way you hope the weather will be nice even though you have already packed an umbrella. But she had expected this. Communications, she said. Coded FTL burst. Priority 1. Following message. She took a breath. Whiskey Tango to Forge Actual. Artemis 4. They did not listen. Case iron. The message was short. Her kit traveled at faster-than-light speeds through a network of relay beacons that the hegemony did not know existed, using an encryption protocol that the hegemony could not break, to a destination that the hegemony had never mapped. It arrived at its target in seconds. Santos turned to her helm officer. Move us out of their approach path. Weapons to standby. Do not power up targeting systems. Ma'am, the helm officer looked confused. We are not engaging? We are not engaging. We are observing. But ma'am, if they reach the colony, they will reach the colony. We cannot stop 200 warships with 1 corvette, Lieutenant. That was never the plan. The Whiskey Tango slid gracefully out of the hegemony fleet's path and took up a position at a safe distance. Santos sat in her chair and watched the red dots advance toward Artemis 4. Far away on the bridge of the Throne of Certainty, Orin watched the corvette move aside. He had expected it to run. He had expected it to fight. He had not expected it to simply step out of the way and watch. Beside him, a communication arrived on a private channel. Drenak, the Torvan advisor, was monitoring the operation from hegemony space. His message was brief. She is not running. She is not fighting. She is waiting. I do not know what she is waiting for, but the fact that she is waiting and not running terrifies me more than any weapon I have ever faced. Fleet Master, I strongly advise you to reconsider this operation. Orin closed the message without replying. The hegemony fleet entered orbit around Artemis 4 3 hours later. From above, the planet looked exactly as the scouts had described. Dry, dusty, small settlements connected by thin lines of infrastructure. Nothing impressive, nothing threatening. Orin ordered landing operations to begin. Troop transports detached from the larger warships and began their descent through the thin atmosphere. Thousands of Valoxi soldiers in full combat armor, supported by armored vehicles and aerial drones, heading for the surface of a world that had no visible military installations, no orbital defenses, and no apparent means of resistance. It should have felt like a victory. It felt like something else. On the surface in New Thessaly, the colonial governor activated the emergency broadcast system. Her message was calm and clear, not a call to arms, not a declaration of defiance, just instructions. All citizens proceed to designated shelter locations. Follow the blue markers. Hunter, bring personal emergency kits. Leave everything else. Do not engage with approaching forces. Repeat, do not engage. The people of New Thessaly moved. They moved quickly, and they moved quietly, and they moved with the kind of practiced efficiency that comes from doing something many times. Every household on Artemis 4 had an emergency kit. Every citizen knew their assigned shelter. Every shelter entrance was marked and maintained and stocked. The shelters were deep, very deep, dug into the bedrock of the planet using mining equipment that had been shipped from Sol at considerable expense, far more expense than seemed justified for a farming colony on a dusty frontier world. The tunnels went down for hundreds of meters and branched into networks that connected every settlement on the continent. They were reinforced, they were supplied, and they were, if you looked at them with a military eye, not shelters at all. They were bunkers. The hegemony ground forces landed in empty towns, streets with no people, buildings with no occupants, doors left open, meals left half-eaten on tables. The colonists had simply vanished into the ground. A Veloxi squad leader reported to his commander. The settlement is empty, no resistance, no casualties. They are gone. Find them, the commander ordered. They tried. The first squad that entered a tunnel entrance hit an automated defense system that killed 3 soldiers with precise targeted fire before they could retreat. The second squad found a different entrance and made it 50 meters underground before the tunnel collapsed behind them. They spent 6 hours digging their way back to the surface. The colonists were not fighting, nor the planet was fighting for them. Every tunnel was trapped. Every entrance was covered. The infrastructure of the colony, the roads and rail lines and power conduits that looked so innocent from orbit, was laced with systems designed to make an occupying force miserable. But this was an inconvenience, not a crisis. Orin had 200 ships and an army. He could take this planet apart piece by piece if he needed to. The humans could hide underground for a while, but eventually they would have to come out. He settled into wait. In orbit above him, the Whiskey Tango drifted silently. Captain Santos sat in her chair and drank another cup of coffee and watched the tactical display and said nothing. On the surface outside New Thessaly, a grizzled farmer named Hector Moran was the last civilian to reach his shelter entrance. Well, he was 67 years old. He had come to Artemis 420 years ago because he wanted to build something with his hands, and he had built a farm that covered 200 acres of land that had never grown anything before he touched it. He was proud of that farm. He had put his life into that soil. He paused at the shelter entrance and looked up. The sky was full of alien warships. They caught the light of the local star and glittered like cruel jewelry against the pale blue atmosphere. Hector Moran had served in the Terran Defense Force for 12 years before becoming a farmer. He had fought in 3 engagements. He knew what warships looked like, what they could do, and what they meant. He also knew what a case iron signal meant, because every veteran did. He looked at the sky full of hegemony ships and shook his head slowly. "Hey, poor bastards," he said. Then he went underground and sealed the door behind him. Far away in the dark space between Artemis and Sol, something was moving. Something that did not show up on any sensor. Something that made no sound and cast no light and left no trail. Something very, very large. There is a particular kind of darkness between stars that most species never experience. It is not the darkness of a night sky, or a deep cave, or a room with the lights off. It is the darkness of nothing. True, absolute, infinite nothing. No light, no heat, no matter worth mentioning. Just vacuum stretching in every direction, farther than the mind can hold. In that darkness, something moved. It did not announce itself. It did not glow. It did not pulse with energy signatures or broadcast identification codes, or leave the faint gravitational ripple that most faster-than-light drives produced. It moved through the void the way a shark moves through deep water, silent, patient, aware. The TDF Thermopylae was 2 kilometers long. That number does not mean very much on its own. Space is large, and 2 kilometers is a small thing measured against the distance between worlds. But the Thermopylae was not measured against the distance between worlds. It was measured against other warships, and against other warships, it was enormous. It was roughly 8 times the length of the largest Veloxi capital ship in the fleet, currently occupying Artemis IV. It massed more than any 40 of those ships combined. It was a Forge-class dreadnought, and there were only 12 of them in the entire Terran Defense Force. Not because the Terrans could not build more, because 12 was enough. The Thermopylae did not look like a Veloxi warship. Veloxi warships were elegant. They curved and swept and gleamed. They were designed to be seen and admired. The Thermopylae was designed to do a job. It was angular. Flat planes of armor met at hard edges. There were no curves, no flowing lines, no aesthetic concessions of any kind. The hull was a dark matte gray that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. The surface was studded with weapons emplacements, sensor arrays, and launch bays, all of them recessed into the armor rather than mounted on top of it. Everything that could be protected was protected. Everything that could be hidden was hidden. The ship looked like it had been carved from a single block of metal by someone who hated anything that was not functional. Scout Commander Yvrel had described Terran ships as looking like they were built by something that expected to die and did not care. She was half right. The Thermopylae was built by something that expected to be hit by everything the universe could throw at it and intended to keep fighting anyway. On the bridge of the Thermopylae, Admiral Jun Seo Park sat in his command chair and read the latest tactical update from Captain Santos. Park was 61 years old. His hair was silver, his face was lined, his hands were steady. He had been a flag officer in the Terran Defense Force for 19 years and had commanded the 7th Expeditionary Fleet for the last 7. In that time, the 7th had never been deployed in a full combat operation. It had conducted patrols, exercises, humanitarian missions, and enough readiness drills to fill a lifetime. It had trained and prepared and waited. Park had spent those 7 years hoping he would never have to use his fleet for its intended purpose. He was a thoughtful man. He read poetry. He played the cello badly. He had a daughter who taught biology on Mars and a son who built furniture on Earth. He did not love war, but he was very, very good at it. The case iron signal from the Whiskey Tango had reached Terran Command through the relay network in seconds. It had been verified, authenticated, and escalated in under a minute. The 7th Expeditionary Fleet had received its activation order within 15 minutes of Santos sending her message. There was no debate, no committee meeting, no political discussion. Case iron was not a request. It was a trigger, a predetermined response built into the deepest level of Terran military doctrine. When a Terran colony was threatened, the nearest expeditionary fleet moved. Automatically, immediately. The way your hand moves away from a hot surface before your brain has finished processing the pain. The 7th Fleet had made the jump to Artemis in under 6 hours. Not because it was close. The 7th had been stationed at Kepler Station, nearly 40 light-years from Artemis. It made the journey in under 6 hours because Terran FTL drives were faster than anyone in the hegemony knew. The hegemony had estimated Terran FTL capability based on Yvrel's observations of civilian traffic in the Sol system. Cargo ships, colony transports, passenger liners, slow, ponderous vessels that plodded between systems at speeds the hegemony considered adequate. They had not observed Terran military vessels because Terran military vessels did not want to be observed. The Terran Defense Force had learned long ago that the best advantage in any conflict was an advantage the enemy did not know you had. Their warships ran dark, no active emissions, no beacon pings, no energy signatures beyond what could be masked by background radiation. When a Terran warship moved through space, it moved like a submarine in an ocean of nothing. You did not see it. You did not hear it. You did not know it was there until it wanted you to know. And now 40 Terran warships sat in the darkness at the edge of the Artemis system, waiting for Admiral Park to give the order. Park read Santos's report for the 3rd time. To 200 hegemony warships, ground forces deployed to the surface, colony populations secured in deep bunkers, no Terran casualties. The hegemony fleet was in standard occupation formation, spread across orbital positions above Artemis IV, focused on the planet below. They were not watching the dark. Fleet status, Park said. His flag captain, a woman named Torres with short dark hair and the kind of calm that came from 20 years of service, responded immediately. All ships report battle ready, Admiral. Weapons hot. Drives standing by, awaiting your order. Park nodded. He looked at the tactical display. 200 red dots clustered around the blue-green circle of Artemis 4. One lonely green dot, Santos and the Whiskey Tango, sitting at the system's edge. And 40 more green dots, invisible to everyone else, to arranged in a loose formation in the dark. Signal the fleet, Park said. Plan meridian. I will go in first. The fleet will jump on my mark 30 seconds after I arrive. Standard doctrine. No one fires until I give the word. Torres raised an eyebrow a fraction of an inch. You want to go in alone first, sir? I want them to see one ship. I want them to have a moment to think about what one ship means before they see 40. Torres nodded. She understood. This was not about tactics. This was about a message. Signal sent, Admiral. Fleet acknowledges. Thermopylae is clear to jump. Park looked at the tactical display one more time. Then he set down his datapad and straightened in his chair. Take us in. The Thermopylae jumped. It dropped out of FTL at the edge of the Artemis system, roughly 2 million kilometers from the Hegemony fleet's outermost picket ships. It did not try to be subtle about its arrival. The moment it appeared in normal space, it activated a single sensor pulse. One massive burst of active scanning energy that swept across the entire system like a searchlight being turned on in a dark room. The pulse hit every Hegemony ship simultaneously. Every sensor screen on every vessel in Orin's fleet suddenly displayed a new contact. On the bridge of the Throne of Certainty, the reaction was immediate. Contact, the sensor officer shouted. Single contact, bearing 271 mark, positive 15. Range 2 million kilometers. It just appeared. No FTL wake detected. No approach trajectory. It was simply not there, and then it was. Orin turned from the surface operation reports he had been reviewing. Siri, classification? The sensor officer stared at his display. He ran the scan again. He checked his calibrations. He looked at the numbers, and the numbers did not change, and he felt something cold slide down his spine. Fleet Master, the contact is... I am having difficulty classifying it. Its mass reading exceeds any warship in our registry. It is reading as approximately 2 kilometers in length. 2 kilometers, Orin repeated. Yes, Fleet Master. Its power output is... The sensor officer paused. Fleet Master, its power output is registering as a stellar anomaly. Our sensors are interpreting it as a small star. I believe this is an error in our classification algorithms. They are not designed to process a warship of this magnitude. Orin stared at the tactical display. A single red dot sat at the edge of the system. It was the largest contact his fleet had ever registered. Armor composition? He asked. Unknown, Fleet Master. The material does not match any known alloy in our database. It is reflecting our scans in ways I cannot interpret. I have never seen readings like this. The bridge was very quiet. Then the communication channel opened. The voice that came through was human, male, calm in the way that deep water is calm, with something vast and heavy underneath the surface. This is Admiral Jun Seo Park of the Terran Defense Force, 7th Expeditionary Fleet, aboard the dreadnought Thermopylae. I am addressing the commanding officer of the Veloxy Hegemony Fleet, currently in orbit around Artemis 4. Park paused. When he spoke again, his voice carried the same quiet steadiness. You are occupying a Terran world. You were warned. Well, you were given the opportunity to leave. That opportunity has now expired. Another pause. You have 30 seconds to begin withdrawal procedures before I am joined by the rest of my fleet. I strongly recommend you use that time wisely. The channel closed. 30 seconds. Orin stood on his bridge and felt the weight of those 30 seconds like a physical thing pressing down on his chest. He looked at the tactical display. One contact, one enormous, impossible contact sitting at the edge of his system like a predator watching from the tree line. He thought about Calyx Vone. He thought about what the Supreme Arbiter would say if he withdrew from a system because one ship, however large, told him to. He thought about his career, his reputation, his future. He made his decision. All ships to battle formation, he ordered. Bring weapons online. Target that vessel. 23 seconds later, the Thermopylae fired. The spinal mount kinetic accelerator was the primary weapon of every Forge-class dreadnought. It ran the entire length of the ship, from the reactor assembly at the stern to the launch aperture at the bow. It accelerated a tungsten alloy projectile to a measurable fraction of the speed of light. The projectile had no warhead. It did not need one. At the velocities involved, the kinetic energy alone was sufficient to do things that most species would consider impossible. The round crossed 2 million kilometers of space in a time that no organic brain could meaningfully process. It struck the hegemony cruiser Radiant Conviction amidships. The Radiant Conviction was a frontline warship, 300 meters long, fully shielded, armored. It had served the hegemony for decades and had survived engagements against 4 different species. The tungsten slug passed through its shields as if they were not there. It passed through the forward armor. It passed through the bridge, the reactor, the crew quarters, the engineering section, and the aft armor. It exited the other side of the ship and continued onward, striking the cruiser directly behind the Radiant Conviction and passing through that ship as well, and then hitting a third ship behind that one. 3 warships, 1 round. Elapsed time from trigger pull to final impact, less than 1 second. The Radiant Conviction did not explode. There was not enough of it left to explode. Along the axis of the projectile's path, the ship simply ceased to exist. What remained was 2 halves of a warship, drifting apart in the vacuum, eventing atmosphere and debris and bodies. The other 2 ships were in similar condition. No one on the hegemony fleet had ever seen anything like it. Their weapons were energy-based, plasma, particle beams, focused radiation. They understood those weapons. They could calculate their effects, predict their damage, defend against them. A solid projectile moving at relativistic speeds was something they had theorized about but never encountered. It was considered impractical, too expensive, too difficult to aim, too primitive. It was not primitive. The hegemony fleet had 30 seconds to process what had happened. Some ships began evasive maneuvers. Some charged their weapons and returned fire, sending beams of plasma arcing across the void toward the Thermopylae. The beams hit the dreadnought's armor and splashed across it like water hitting stone. They left scorch marks. They did not penetrate. Then the 30 seconds were up, and the rest of the 7th Fleet arrived. 40 warships dropped out of FTL in a pattern that surrounded the hegemony fleet on all sides. They did not arrive in formation. They arrived in a spread. Each ship appeared at a different position, at a different angle, covering a different vector. There was no geometric elegance, no neat lines, no diamond patterns. They appeared like wolves materializing from fog, each one already in position, already moving, already targeting. Destroyers, cruisers, frigates, carrier groups. And at the center of them all, the Thermopylae, vast and dark and patient. On the bridge of the throne of certainty, Fleetmaster Orin watched his tactical display fill with green dots, 40 of them, surrounding his 200 ships in a net of metal and weapons. His sensor officer was reading off contacts with a voice that had gone flat and mechanical, the way voices go when the brain behind them is trying not to process what it is seeing. 40 warships, Fleetmaster. Multiple classifications. Each individual vessel reads as superior to our heavy cruisers in tonnage, armament, and power output. Their formation is not standard. I cannot predict their attack pattern. They have targeting locks on our entire fleet. Orin did not speak. Across the system, Captain Santos watched from the bridge of the Whiskey Tango. She had been waiting for this moment for hours, and despite everything, there was no satisfaction in it. She opened a channel to the hegemony flagship. "Fleetmaster Orin," she said, "this is Captain Santos. As I mentioned earlier, I was not here to fight you. I was here to make sure you understood what happens next. What you are seeing now is what happens next." She paused. "I would like to re-extend my original offer. Please withdraw your forces from Terran space. We have no desire to destroy your fleet. The Admiral has given you every chance to leave. I am asking you personally to take that chance." Orin heard her words. He looked at his tactical display. 200 ships surrounded by 40, and he realized with a clarity that felt like ice water in his veins, that his 200 ships were outgunned. Not outnumbered. Outgunned. Each one of those 40 Terran warships was worth 10 of his. Maybe more. The mathematics of the situation, the simple cold equation that Calix Vone had always said made warfare predictable, was telling him something that every instinct in his body already knew. He was trapped. Far away in hegemony space, Drenak sat alone in his quarters and monitored the tactical feeds from Artemis. He watched the Terran fleet materialize around Orin's forces. He watched the numbers update on his screen. He watched the power readings, the weapon signatures, the movement patterns of ships that fought like nothing in the hegemony's long history of warfare. He thought about what Yvrel had said. Their ships looked wrong, like they were built by something that expected to die and did not care. Now he understood what she meant. These ships were not built by a species that expected to die. They were built by a species that had stared at death so many times for so many centuries, across so many wars fought against themselves, that they had learned exactly how much damage a ship needed to survive and exactly how much damage it needed to deal. There was no waste, no beauty, no wasted energy on anything that did not serve the purpose of keeping the crew alive and the enemy dead. These were the ships of a species that had perfected the art of war by practicing on the only opponents worthy of the challenge, each other. Drenak closed his eyes and sent one final message to Fleet Master Orin. It said, "Surrender." Orin stared at the message. He stared at the tactical display. He stared at the dark shape of the Thermopylae, visible through the bridge viewport, blotting out the stars like a wound in space. Around him, his bridge crew waited in silence. The entire fleet waited. 200 warships, the pride of the Valoxy hegemony, surrounded by 40 ships from a species they had laughed at. Nobody was laughing now. Fleet Master Orin chose to fight. He did not choose it because he believed he could win. The tactical display told him everything he needed to know about his chances, and the numbers were not kind. He chose to fight because of what waited for him if he did not. If he surrendered 200 warships without firing a shot, Calix Vone would destroy him. Not metaphorically. The Supreme Arbiter did not tolerate failure, and he absolutely did not tolerate cowardice. Orin would be stripped of his rank, his family would be disgraced, and he would spend whatever remained of his life in a cell beneath the war chamber, one an example to anyone who might consider the unthinkable act of retreating from a lesser species. At least if he fought, there was a story to tell. A fleet that went down swinging against an overwhelming force was a fleet that could be honored. Defeat in battle was acceptable. Surrender was not. It was a stupid reason to condemn thousands of soldiers to death. Orin knew that. He gave the order anyway. "All ships, engage," he said. His voice was steady. He owed his crews that much. "Fleet formation Primus. Concentrate fire on the large vessel. All fighter wings launch. All point defense systems active." 200 warships pivoted and opened fire. The void between the hegemony fleet and the Terran fleet lit up with plasma. Bright blue bolts of superheated matter streaked across the darkness, converging on the Thermopylae from dozens of angles simultaneously. Particle beams lanced out like needles of white light. Missile batteries dumped their payloads into space, sending swarms of guided munitions arcing toward the nearest Terran contacts. It was an impressive display. The combined firepower of 200 Valoxy warships was enough to crack the crust of a small moon. It was the kind of concentrated destructive power that had ended wars in hours, that had broken species, that had made the name of the hegemony synonymous with unstoppable military force across 2 galactic arms. The Thermopylae took all of it. Plasma bolts struck the dreadnought's armor and dissipated. Particle beams scored lines of molten metal across the hull that cooled and hardened almost instantly. Missiles detonated against the surface in flashes of light that briefly illuminated the ship's massive silhouette before fading to nothing. The armor held. On the bridge of the Thermopylae, Admiral Park felt the deck vibrate beneath his feet as the ship absorbed the combined fury of an entire fleet. Warning lights flickered on damage control panels. Somewhere deep in the ship, a secondary hull plate buckled under sustained fire and was immediately reinforced by automated repair systems. "Damage report," Park said. "Outer armor degradation at 7% in sectors 12 through 15, Torres reported. "No penetration, no system damage, no casualties." 7%. 200 warships firing everything they had, and they had scratched the paint. Return fire, Park said. All batteries. Our fleet-wide engagement authorized. The Thermopylae responded. The spinal mount fired again. Another tungsten slug crossed the void at a speed that turned physics into a weapon. It struck a hegemony battlecruiser and passed through it and through the destroyer behind it. Two more ships gone in less than a second. But the spinal mount was just one weapon. The Thermopylae carried hundreds of others. Broadside railgun batteries opened up, each one hurling projectiles that were smaller than the spinal mount's rounds but still devastating. Point defense turrets designed to intercept incoming missiles were repurposed to shred fighters. Missile tubes launched salvos of autonomous munitions that selected their own targets, adjusted their own trajectories, and struck with a precision that was almost surgical. And then the rest of the 7th Fleet opened fire. The 40 Terran warships had been waiting in their positions, weapons locked, drives ready. When Park gave the order, they attacked from every direction at once. There was no single line of battle, no neat formation exchanging volleys across a defined front. The Terran ships came at the hegemony fleet from above, below, ahead, behind, and both sides simultaneously. Terran doctrine did not believe in fair fights. The doctrine had a name. It was called overwhelming response, and it had been developed over centuries of human warfare. Its core principle was simple. When you fight to end the fight as fast as possible, with as much force as possible, taking as few losses as possible. There was no honor system, no ritual combat, no tradition of meeting your enemy blade to blade and testing your courage against theirs. There was only the objective, neutralize the threat, and the most efficient path to achieving it. The hegemony fought in formations because formations were elegant and disciplined and had worked for 1,000 years against species that fought the same way. Their ships held their positions relative to each other, maintaining overlapping fields of fire, protecting each other's flanks, advancing and retreating as a single coordinated unit. The Terrans did not fight like this. Each Terran ship operated with a degree of independence that would have been considered insubordination in the hegemony navy. Captains made their own tactical decisions within the framework of the admiral's plan. Ships broke formation, reformed, broke again. They used the hegemony's own ships as cover, ducking behind damaged vessels to avoid return fire, emerging from unexpected angles to deliver devastating broadsides. They were faster. That was the thing that Arin could not get past. His ships were not slow. Voloxi warships were considered among the most maneuverable in the known galaxy. But the Terran ships were faster, not by a small margin, by a margin that changed the nature of the fight entirely. The hegemony fleet was built for a certain kind of warfare. Close-range engagement at distances where their plasma weapons were most effective. Their strategy depended on closing with the enemy, bringing their superior numbers to bear, and overwhelming them with concentrated fire at short range. The Terran ships would not let them close. And every time a hegemony formation tried to close the distance, the Terran ships simply moved. They accelerated away, maintaining the range at which their kinetic weapons were devastating and the hegemony's energy weapons were weakened by distance. They hammered the advancing hegemony ships from ranges where they could barely return fire. When a hegemony group got too close, the Terran ships were already gone, repositioned, hitting them from a different angle. It was like fighting smoke. The electronic warfare made it worse. The Terran ships broadcast jamming signals that blinded hegemony sensors in unpredictable patterns. One moment, a hegemony gunner had a clear targeting solution. The next, his screen was filled with ghost contacts, false signatures, and static. He would fire at a target that was not there, and while he was firing, a real Terran ship would hit him from a direction he had not been watching. The autonomous missile swarms were relentless. Terran missiles were not like hegemony missiles. They were smaller, harder to detect, and they thought for themselves. They did not fly in straight lines toward their targets. They cooperated with each other, dividing into groups, approaching from multiple vectors, timing their impacts to overwhelm point defense systems. A hegemony cruiser could shoot down 10 missiles. It could not shoot down 10 missiles coming from 10 different directions at the same time. Ship after ship fell. On the bridge of the Throne of Certainty, Arin watched his fleet die on the tactical display. Red dots flickered and went dark. Each one was a ship. Each ship had a crew. Each crew had families waiting for them back in hegemony space. A hegemony heavy cruiser, the Eternal Mandate, tried to make a run at the Thermopylae. It charged straight in, all weapons firing, its captain screaming orders to concentrate everything on one point of the dreadnought's hull. The Thermopylae did not even try to dodge. It simply absorbed the fire and responded with a broadside that tore the Eternal Mandate apart from stem to stern. The pieces drifted away, glowing and spinning, and the Thermopylae moved on. Orin's fighter wings fared no better. The hegemony launched thousands of small attack craft from its carrier vessels. They were fast and numerous and piloted by some of the best aviators in the hegemony navy. They swarmed toward the Terran fleet in coordinated waves. The Terran point defense systems ate them alive. Every Terran ship was covered in small, rapid-fire turrets controlled by targeting computers that operated faster than any organic pilot could react. The fighters flew into walls of projectile fire that filled the space ahead of them with metal. Entire squadrons vanished in seconds. The surviving fighters that made it through the point defense found that their weapons, designed to damage ships of hegemony size and construction, could barely scratch the Terran hulls. They fired their payloads and watched them splash harmlessly against armor that seemed to absorb everything thrown at it. Then the point defense turrets found them, and they stopped existing. Throughout all of this, Admiral Park sat in his command chair and gave orders in the same calm, clinical tone he had used since the battle began. Task Group 3, shift to Vector 77. When you have a carrier group trying to flank you at 220. Destroyer Jakarta, you have debris in your firing lane. Adjust 2 degrees positive. Cruiser Vladivostok, the battleship at your 11 o'clock is venting atmosphere. It is combat ineffective. Move to the next target. There was no anger in his voice, no excitement, no battle cry. This was a job. He was doing it the way a surgeon does surgery, with precision and focus, and no wasted motion. Every order served the objective. Every maneuver had a purpose. He was taking the hegemony fleet apart the way a mechanic disassembles an engine, piece by piece in order. Drenok, monitoring from hegemony space, would later describe it to the war chamber. He would search for the right words for a long time before finding them. Why, it was like watching a surgeon operate on a screaming patient, he said. They did not hate us. They did not enjoy it. They simply identified the problem and removed it. That is what made it terrible. The complete absence of emotion. 2 hours into the battle, the hegemony fleet had lost 80 ships, destroyed or disabled, drifting in the void, venting atmosphere and fuel and crew members. The Terran fleet had lost 0 ships, not one. Several had taken damage. Armor scarred, systems strained, crews pushed to their limits. But every Terran ship was still fighting. Then the Jakarta happened. The TDF destroyer Jakarta was smaller than most ships in the 7th Fleet. A fast attack destroyer, lightly armored compared to the cruisers and the Thermopylae. Its captain was a woman named Edize Okonkwo, who was 34 years old and had been born on a space station orbiting Jupiter and had never once set foot on Earth. A group of 5 hegemony cruisers managed to outmaneuver the Jakarta's support group and catch it in a crossfire. Plasma bolts struck the destroyer from 3 directions simultaneously. The engine section took a direct hit. Primary drives went offline. Secondary drives followed. The Jakarta was dead in space, drifting, unable to maneuver. The hegemony cruisers closed in. This was what they were good at. Close-range, concentrated fire, a wounded enemy that could not run. Captain Okonkwo assessed the damage. Her engines were gone. Her reactor was operating at 60%. Life support was failing on 3 decks. She had 17 wounded and 4 dead. She did not surrender. She ordered all non-essential decks vented to vacuum. Her crew sealed their suits, switched to internal air supplies, and abandoned every section of the ship that was not directly involved in fighting. Power that had been going to life support, gravity generation, lighting, and heating was rerouted to weapons and shields. The Jakarta could not move, but it could still shoot. The 5 hegemony cruisers discovered this when they closed to what they considered killing range, and the Jakarta opened up with everything it had. Railgun batteries fired in continuous streams. Point defense turrets, freed from the need to protect against fighters, were turned against the cruiser's lighter armor. Missile tubes dumped their remaining payloads at point-blank range. The first hegemony cruiser died almost instantly. The second lost its weapons array and began to drift. The third tried to retreat and took a railgun volley through its reactor. The fourth rammed the Jakarta's debris field and lost its navigation systems. The fifth managed to land several more hits on the crippled destroyer before a full broadside from the Jakarta's port batteries tore through its hull. By the time a Terran cruiser group fought its way through to rescue the Jakarta, Captain Okonkwo's crippled, venting, half-dead ship had destroyed 5 hegemony cruisers and damaged 6 more that had come to assist. When the rescue team boarded the Jakarta, they found the crew still at their stations, still in their vacuum suits, still firing. The ship's ammunition was nearly spent. 3 more crew members had died. The survivors were bruised, bleeding, exhausted, and furious. Not furious at the hegemony, furious at themselves. "We should have gotten more," Captain Okonkwo told the rescue team commander. Her face was bloody. One eye was swollen shut. She had not left her command chair for 4 hours. "They sent 5, and we only got 5. We had the ammo for at least 3 more. The rescue team commander stared at her. He had been in the Terran Defense Force for 15 years and had seen a lot of things. But the look in Okonkwo's one working eye was something he would remember for the rest of his life. 3 hours after the battle began, it was over. Of the hegemony's 200 warships, 140 were destroyed or disabled. Broken hulls drifted in the void around Artemis IV, surrounded by clouds of debris and frozen atmosphere, and the bodies of the dead. The remaining 60 ships had been herded by the Terran fleet into a tight cluster, surrounded on all sides. Their weapons still active, but their tactical situation hopeless. Admiral Park opened a channel. "Fleet Master Orin, you have fought. Your fleet has fought. The courage of your officers and crews is not in question. But this battle is over. You have lost." His voice remained what it had been throughout. Calm, steady, respectful. "Surrender your remaining vessels and your crews will be treated humanely. They will receive medical attention. They will be given food and water and shelter. When the political situation permits, they will be returned to the hegemony. You have my word and the word of the Terran Defense Force." A pause. "This offer will not be repeated." On the bridge of the throne of certainty, as Fleet Master Orin looked at what remained of his fleet. 60 ships, damaged, low on ammunition, surrounded. His crew was looking at him, not with anger, not with blame, with exhaustion, with the hollow eyes of people who had just watched 140 ships full of people they knew be destroyed in 3 hours. He thought about Calyx Vone. He thought about disgrace in prison and the cold cell beneath the war chamber. Then he thought about the crews on his remaining 60 ships, the thousands of lives that still depended on his next decision. He closed his eyes. "All ships," he said, "stand down, power down weapons. This is Fleet Master Orin. I am ordering a general surrender." The hegemony fleet went quiet. Ship by ship, weapons powered down, shields dropped. Engines went to idle. It was done. On the surface of Artemis IV, the hegemony ground forces had watched the battle in the sky above them. They had seen their fleet burn. They had seen the lights of dying ships streak across the thin atmosphere like falling stars. They had heard the communications, the desperate calls for help, the orders that stopped mid-sentence, the silence that followed. They were cut off. Their fleet was gone. Their commanders were dead or surrendered. They were standing on a planet full of bunkers they could not crack, surrounded by automated defenses they could not beat. Under a sky now owned by an enemy they could not fight. They laid down their weapons. The bunker doors opened. The colonists of Artemis IV came back to the surface. They came out blinking in the daylight, carrying children, supporting the elderly, looking up at a sky that was still hazed with the distant glow of burning wreckage. Terran Marines landed within the hour. Dropships touched down outside every settlement and disgorged squads of armored soldiers who moved with calm efficiency through the streets. They secured the hegemony prisoners. They established perimeters. They set up field hospitals. There were no reprisals, no revenge, no cruelty. The Veloxi soldiers were disarmed, given water, and processed through intake stations where their wounds were treated and their identities were recorded. A Terran medic knelt beside a wounded Veloxi soldier whose leg was badly burned and spent 20 minutes treating the wound, using supplies from her own kit before moving on to treat a wounded human with a broken arm. The Veloxi soldier watched her go with an expression that no one from the hegemony would have understood. He had been told that Terrans were primitive, aggressive, barely civilized. He had been told they were animals. He had just watched this animal bandage his leg and give him painkillers and tell him, through a translation device, that he was going to be okay. In the intake line, a captured Veloxi officer stood beside a Terran Marine who was processing prisoners. The Veloxi was a mid-ranking commander. He had fought well. He had lost. He looked at the Marine. The Marine was young, tired. His armor was dusty and scratched. He looked like someone who had been doing hard work for a very long time and wanted to go home. "Why?" the Veloxi officer asked. The Marine looked up. "Why did your admiral not destroy us all? He could have. The 60 ships that surrendered, he could have destroyed every one of them. We were helpless. Why did he stop?" The Marine looked at him for a long moment. Then he shrugged. "Yeah," he said. "He could have. That is the point." The Veloxi officer did not understand. He would think about those words for a very long time before he did. Above Artemis IV, the wreckage of 140 warships drifted in silence. The surviving 60 sat powered down, surrounded by Terran escorts. The Thermopylae hung in high orbit, dark and massive and still, watching over all of it like a monument to a lesson that had been learned in the hardest possible way. On the bridge of the Whiskey Tango, Captain Santos sat in her chair and drank a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. She looked at the tactical display. Green dots everywhere. The blue planet below. The red dots were gone. She was very tired. She closed her eyes and let out a long, slow breath. "Okay," she said to no one in particular. "Now comes the hard part." The Grand War Chamber of the Veloxi hegemony was the same room it had always been. The same crystalline walls. The same polished floor. The same ceiling that vanished into shadow above. The same platform of black crystal where the supreme arbiter sat above everyone else. But it did not feel the same. The last time this chamber had been full, the air had hummed with confidence. Commanders had laughed. Aides had whispered casually. The representatives of 60 conquered species had sat in the galleries and watched the business of empire conducted with the easy certainty of a civilization that had never been seriously challenged. Now the chamber was silent. The same commanders sat in the same seats. The same aides stood in the same positions. The same galleries were full of the same representatives. But the laughter was gone. The whispers were gone. The confidence was gone. What remained was the particular heaviness that fills a room when every person in it knows something terrible has happened and none of them know what to do about it. The news from Artemis IV had arrived 2 days ago. It had spread through the hegemony the way fires spread through dry forests. Fast, uncontrollable, devastating. 200 warships, gone. 140 destroyed. 60 captured. The entire subjugation fleet, including its commander, its support vessels, and its ground forces, eliminated or taken prisoner by a force less than a quarter of its size. In 3 hours. The numbers were impossible. Every strategist in the hegemony had run them, checked them, run them again. They all came back the same. A fleet of 40 Terran warships had destroyed a fleet of 200 hegemony warships in 3 hours and had not lost a single ship in the process. Not one. The numbers did not just tell a story of defeat. They told a story of a gap between what the hegemony was and what the Terrans were that was so vast, so fundamental, that it called into question everything the hegemony believed about itself and its place in the galaxy. Supreme Arbiter Calix Vone did not see it that way. He stood on his platform, all 4 arms braced against the railing, his scales shifting between colors so fast they seemed to blur. His golden eyes swept the chamber with the fury of someone who had been personally insulted by the universe. "Yes, this was a failure of command," he said. His voice filled the chamber. It was loud, it was angry, it was absolutely certain. Fleetmaster Orin was given a simple assignment. He failed. His failure is not an indication of Terran strength. It is an indication of his weakness. He paced on his platform. His steps rang against the black crystal. The Terrans caught us off guard. They used surprise and unfamiliar weapons. This will not happen again. I am ordering a full mobilization. 2,000 warships, every available fleet. We will return to Terran space with a force so overwhelming that no amount of tricks or primitive kinetic weapons can save them. He turned to face the chamber directly. The hegemony does not lose. The hegemony has never lost. What happened at Artemis was not a loss. Nah, it was a lesson in the consequences of sending a child to do a warrior's work. I will not make that mistake again. The chamber was quiet, not the quiet of agreement, the quiet of people who wanted to say something and were afraid. Then a voice spoke from the back of the central ring, a rough, gravelly voice that sounded like rocks being broken. You are wrong. Every head in the chamber turned. Drenok stood. He had not been invited to speak. He had not asked permission. He simply stood up from his seat in the corner of the central ring, the same seat he had occupied during Yvrel's report all those weeks ago, and spoke. He was old. He was scarred. He was Torvan, not Veloxi, and his presence at the war table was a courtesy, not a right. He had no authority to address the Supreme Arbiter without permission, and he had no political protection. He had nothing except the fact that he was the oldest surviving combat veteran in the room, and he no longer cared about his career. You are wrong, he said again, louder, and if you send 2,000 ships to Terran space, you will lose 2,000 ships. The silence in the chamber became the kind of silence that comes before violence. Calix Vone stared down at Drenok with an expression that had made admirals flinch and planetary governors beg. It had no visible effect on the old Torvan. You forget your place, advisor. My place is to advise. I am advising. Whether you listen is your choice. But I will not stand in this chamber and watch this civilization destroy itself because its leader is too proud to look at the numbers. Drenok walked forward. He moved slowly, Ode because he was old and his joints hurt and he had been sitting for too long. But he moved with the steady purpose of someone who had made a decision and was not going to be stopped by anything short of physical force. He reached the speaker's platform, the same platform where Yvrel had stood. He activated the display system and began pulling up data. This is Scout Commander Yvrel's original report, he said, the one this chamber laughed at. I want everyone to look at it again. The numbers appeared on the display. Population, industrial capacity, technological progression rates, fleet estimates, all the data that Yvrel had presented and all the data that had been dismissed as impossible or exaggerated. These numbers were accurate, Drenok said, every one of them. Yvrel's intelligence was correct. Her analysis was correct. Her recommendation was correct. This chamber chose to ignore her because her conclusions were uncomfortable and because it is easier to laugh at a young officer than to confront the possibility that the universe contains something stronger than us. He pulled up new data, the battle recordings from Artemis 4. This is what happened when we ignored her. 200 ships, 3 hours, 0 Terran losses. Watch the engagement pattern. Watch how they move. Watch how they coordinate. This is not an army that was lucky. This is not a fleet that caught us off guard. This is a military machine that has been preparing for a fight like this for longer than most of our species have been spacefaring. He let the recording play. The chamber watched in silence as the hegemony fleet was systematically dismantled. The precision of the Terran attacks, the efficiency of their coordination, the cold, methodical way they eliminated one ship after another while taking no losses of their own. Now, Drenok said, and his voice was quiet in a way that made it more frightening than shouting. Let me tell you what 2,000 ships will accomplish. He displayed projections, industrial output of Terran shipyards, production timelines, replacement rates, force escalation models. The Terrans sent 40 ships to Artemis. 40. That was one expeditionary fleet. They have at least 20 such fleets. They have 12 dreadnoughts of the class that single-handedly absorb the firepower of our entire force without meaningful damage. Their shipyards can produce warships faster than we can crew them. Their population can absorb casualties that would break any species in the hegemony. He paused. And they have not mobilized. What hit us at Artemis was not a war response. It was a garrison response, the military equivalent of a reflex action. They sent the nearest available force to deal with a local threat, and that nearest available force destroyed us completely. He looked up at Calyx phone. If you send 2,000 ships, they will send 2,000 ships, or 5,000, or 10,000. They can do this. Their industrial base supports it. Their population supports it. And every ship they send will be crewed by soldiers from a species that has been fighting wars since before our ancestors developed language. He took a breath. You are not preparing for war with a rival power, Supreme Arbiter. You are preparing to knock on the door of a sleeping giant and ask it to eat you. The chamber was very still. The Calyx Vone's scales had stopped shifting. They were fixed in a deep dark blue that meant anger so profound it had gone past heat and into cold. You are finished, he said. I am finished when I have said what needs to be said. You are finished now. Drenak did not move. He stood on the speaker's platform and looked up at the Supreme Arbiter of the Valoxy hegemony and waited. The moment stretched. Then the communications station at the side of the chamber activated. An incoming transmission, Priority 1, from outside hegemony space, from Terra. The communications officer looked at Calyx Vone. The Supreme Arbiter nodded once sharply. The transmission was put through. The voice was human, female, calm in a way that was different from Admiral Park's calm. Park's calm had been the calm of controlled force, and this was the calm of someone who was very good at talking and preferred it to every alternative. This is Ambassador Chen Wei of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. I am broadcasting on behalf of the Terran Federation government. This message is addressed to the Supreme Arbiter of the Valoxy hegemony and the assembled members of the Hegemony Council. The chamber was frozen. Every face turned toward the speakers. First, I want to express the Terran Federation's sincere desire for peace. We do not seek war with the hegemony. We do not seek territory. We do not seek conquest. We are aware of the hegemony's history, its achievements, and its position in this region of the galaxy. We respect what you have built. Her voice remained steady and warm. However, the system of Artemis IV is Terran sovereign space. Its citizens are Terran citizens. When your fleet entered that system and threatened those citizens, it triggered a defensive response. That response has concluded. Your surviving personnel and vessels are being treated humanely, and we are prepared to discuss their return at your earliest convenience. A pause, measured, deliberate. We would prefer to be your neighbors. We would prefer to trade, to exchange knowledge, to build something together. The galaxy is large enough for both of us, and we believe that cooperation between our civilizations could produce benefits that neither of us can achieve alone. Another pause. Longer this time. But if you choose war, we need you to understand something about us. It is not a threat. It is not a boast. It is simply information that we believe you should have before making your decision. The ambassador's voice did not change in tone. It did not become harder or colder or louder. It stayed exactly the same. And somehow that made what she said next worse. If you choose war, we will not fight the way you fight. We will not stop when honor is satisfied. We will not negotiate when the balance shifts. We will not accept a partial victory or a face-saving compromise. We will keep coming until the threat to our people no longer exists. Completely. Permanently. That is not a policy choice. It is not something our leaders decided. It is a cultural reality that has been shaped by 10,000 years of warfare among ourselves. It is who we are. She let that sit for a moment. We do not want to show you who we are. We would very much prefer to show you who we can be when we are not at war. We are builders. We are explorers. We are curious and creative and deeply interested in the universe and everything in it, including you. We would rather study your civilization than fight it. We would rather learn from you than destroy you. But we will do what we must to protect our people. Every time, without hesitation, without limit. The ambassador's voice softened slightly. We are transmitting coordinates for a proposed diplomatic summit on neutral ground, a moon in the Kepler 442 system that belongs to neither of our civilizations. We propose a meeting within 30 standard days. No weapons, no warships, just representatives, sitting in a room, talking about the future. A final pause. We hope you will come. Ambassador Chen Wei, Terran Diplomatic Corps, signing off. The transmission ended. The grand war chamber of the Veloxy hegemony was absolutely silent. 200 beings in a room designed to project power, and not one of them made a sound. Calix Vone stood on his platform. His forearms were rigid at his sides. His golden eyes stared at the communication station, as if the message might come back and say something different. He looked around the chamber. He looked at his fleet commanders, his strategists, his weapons engineers, his political officers. He looked at the faces of every species in the gallery, the conquered peoples who had watched the hegemony's dominance go unchallenged for centuries. He looked for support, for someone who would stand and say, "Yes, we fight." For someone who would give him the excuse he needed to do what every part of his pride was screaming at him to do. He found nothing. The commanders did not meet his eyes. The strategists studied their data pads. The weapons engineers were quiet. Even his most loyal supporters, the officers who had followed him for decades, who had cheered when Yvrel was dismissed, who had laughed at the idea of a Death World species challenging the hegemony, they were silent. They had seen the numbers. All of them. Yvrel's numbers, Drenak's numbers, the battle recordings from Artemis IV, the industrial projections, the population figures, the one number that mattered most, 0. 0 Terran ships lost. They believed the numbers now. Calix Vone's scales shifted, blue to silver to blue again. His jaw worked, his hands clenched and unclenched. And then, in the back of the chamber, Scout Commander Yvrel stood. She did not speak. She did not need to. She simply stood in her place in the observer's gallery, where she had been recalled as a witness, and looked at the Supreme Arbiter. Her face was calm. Her hands were steady. She was no longer the nervous young officer who had trembled on the speaker's platform while the chamber laughed at her. She stood and she waited, and she let her presence say everything that needed to be said. I told you, and you laughed, and people died because you laughed. Calix Vone looked at her. Something passed across his face. Not apology. He was not capable of that, but recognition. The recognition that comes when you realize that the person you dismissed was the only person in the room who was right. He closed his eyes. Send a response to the Terran Diplomatic Corps, he said. His voice was quiet, stripped of its fury, stripped of its certainty, just a voice. Inform them that the hegemony will attend the summit. The chamber exhaled, not with relief, with something more complicated than relief, with the sound of a civilization that had just looked over the edge of an abyss and chosen, barely, to step back. 3 months later, the neutral moon in the Kepler 442 system was small and airless and entirely unremarkable. It had been chosen precisely because it belonged to no one and mattered to no one and had no strategic value whatsoever. It was a blank space, a fresh page. The summit had gone better than anyone expected and worse than anyone hoped. There had been arguments, accusations, walkouts, moments where the entire process seemed ready to collapse. But there had also been agreements, small ones at first, prisoner exchanges, border definitions, communication protocols, then larger ones, trade frameworks, scientific cooperation, a mutual non-aggression treaty that both sides knew was only as strong as the will behind it. It was not peace, not yet, but it was the absence of war, and for now that was enough. On an orbital station above a neutral world, the first joint Terran hegemony research facility opened its doors. It was a modest thing, a converted trading post really, fitted with laboratories and meeting rooms, and a cafeteria that served food from 12 different species and did a bad job with all of it. Drenak visited the station 6 months after the summit. He walked its corridors slowly, observing. He watched Veloxy scientists working beside human scientists, measuring the same phenomena, arguing about the same data, making the same frustrated faces when experiments did not go the way they expected. It was awkward. The old tensions were still there, visible in the stiff body language and the careful politeness and the way people from both species tended to cluster with their own kind during break periods. But they were there, in the same room, working on the same problems. That was something. He found a corner of the cafeteria where a human engineer was sitting across from a Veloxy technician. The human had pushed a cup of dark liquid across the table toward the Veloxy. Try it, the human said. She was grinning in the way humans did when they were about to enjoy someone else's discomfort. It is called coffee. It is the foundation of our entire civilization. The Veloxy technician picked up the cup with two hands and sniffed it cautiously. His scales rippled in a pattern that indicated suspicion. He took a small sip. His reaction was immediate and dramatic. His scales went flat. His eyes widened. His mouth opened and closed several times. He set the cup down with the careful deliberation of someone placing an armed explosive on a table. "That," he said, "is the worst thing I have ever tasted. It is bitter and hot, and it burns, and I think it may be poisoning me." The human laughed. Not the cruel laughter of the war chamber, a different kind. The kind that comes when you are sharing something ridiculous with someone you are beginning to know. "Yeah," she said, "it is terrible. Have another sip. It grows on you. Nothing that tastes like this should be allowed to grow on anyone. We drink 4 cups a day. That explains so much about your species." Dranak watched them from across the room. He did not smile. Torvans could not smile. But something in his old, scarred face softened. Yavrel had been promoted. Quietly. Without ceremony. Without any public acknowledgement that her original report had been correct. She was now Director of Xenological Intelligence, a position that had been created specifically for her, tasked with reviewing and analyzing every scout report in the Hegemony's database. Her first act was to pull every report that had been dismissed over the past century and flag them for reevaluation. There were a lot of them. She did not seek credit. She did not seek an apology from Calix Vone. She did not even seem angry. When Dranak asked her about it, she simply said that being right was not the point. The point was making sure the next warning was heard. Captain Santos received a commendation and a new assignment. She was now the Terran Ambassador-at-Arms to the Hegemony border region, a position that was half diplomat and half military liaison, and entirely suited to someone who could tell an enemy fleet to leave and mean it. She still drank too much coffee. She still wore a wrinkled uniform. She was, by all reports, very good at her job. Fleet Master Arin was returned to the Hegemony as part of the prisoner exchange. He was not punished, though the threat of it hung over him for months. In the end, the political reality was that punishing the commander of Artemis would mean publicly acknowledging the scale of the defeat. And Calix Vone preferred to let the matter fade from public attention. Orin was quietly reassigned to a desk position in logistics. He did not protest. He spent his evenings writing a detailed analysis of Terran military doctrine that no one in the high command asked for, and that would, years later, become required reading at the Hegemony's Naval Academy. Captain Okonkwo of the Jakarta received the Terran Star of Valor. Her ship was repaired and returned to service. She requested and received assignment back to the 7th Fleet. When asked by a reporter why she had not taken the promotion she was offered, she said that she liked her ship and she liked her crew, and she was not finished yet. Admiral Park returned to Kepler Station with the 7th Fleet. He wrote a brief action report that ran to exactly 4 pages. It covered the engagement, and the tactics, the outcome, and his recommendations. It was precise and clinical and contained no emotion of any kind. But he also wrote a private letter to Terran Command. It was not included in the official record. It was personal. He wrote it late at night, alone in his quarters, with a glass of something strong and his cello leaning against the wall in the corner. The letter said many things. It discussed the battle. It discussed the enemy. It discussed the performance of his fleet and his officers, and the terrible mathematics of destroying 140 ships full of living beings who had done nothing wrong except follow the orders of leaders who had made a catastrophic mistake. But the last paragraph was the one that mattered. "They learned," Park wrote. "That is the best outcome. They saw what we are capable of, and they chose to talk instead of fight. And that means something. It means the galaxy might be a little bit bigger tomorrow than it was yesterday, a little bit more open, a little bit more connected." He paused. He looked at the words on the screen. "The galaxy is too big and too beautiful for the alternative. I have seen it from the bridge of a warship, and I know what it looks like when it is lit by weapons fire, and I do not want to see that again. I want to see it lit by the light of stars and the glow of stations, where people from different worlds sit together and drink terrible coffee and argue about things that do not matter." He set down his glass. "But keep the 7th Fleet ready. just in case the next ones do not learn as quickly. He signed the letter, sent it, and went to bed. Outside his window, the stars burned. Billions of them, old and young, bright and dim, each one a sun, each sun possibly warming a world, each world possibly holding someone looking up at the sky and wondering what was out there. The galaxy was very large and it was full of questions, and for the first time in a long time, at least two civilizations were asking them together. It was not a happy ending. It was not a sad ending. It was a beginning, and that was enough.